All right, folks, we're jumping into part one. First, I want to talk about risk versus reward. And you can see it's pretty much said in this slide that we have here. You know, you've got two axes in life. You've got risk and reward. And everything that you do is always a trade-off between the two of those. And in this section, I want to talk about how this works and the fundamentals of intelligent investing. And I also want to talk about how Bitcoin today compares to Microsoft in 1998. And let's just talk about risk. Because if I'm very honest with you, I haven't always been good at taking risks in my life. Sometimes I take too many risks with very little reward. And sometimes I don't take enough risks, and therefore I don't experience enough reward. And it's been a whole balancing act my entire life, and I kind of want to walk you through this scenario. But before we get started, you've got to understand that you're not going to get a reward without embracing some type of risk. That could be in your life, that could mean in your portfolio, that could mean in your actions every single day. And there's no two ways to solve this problem. Unless you are actively and intelligently engaging in risk, there will be no reward. And that's one of the biggest and most important realizations of my life. And it's something we should talk about right now. And so before we get involved in what coins to buy and what marketplaces to buy them, you have to understand that reward only comes with risk. And when I look at my life and some of the big events that I have, when I was 18 years old, I left my parents in San Diego. I flew 6 hours across the country and started my education at MIT. I didn't know anybody there. I moved into a fraternity house with 50 guys I didn't know. And I was there. I had to sink or swim. And it was a very challenging time of my life, but also extremely rewarding. And I learned so many valuable lessons, and I became, really a man at that point. And it was all because I took the risk. And then 4 years later, I decided to go straight to the belly of the beast. I moved to Wall Street, to New York City. Never lived in that crazy city before. I worked on one of the most intense trading floors ever. But again, it's because I took the risk. And that's why I got so much reward and I learned so much on the back of it. Later, when I was 30 years old, I moved to London, didn't know anybody here, started a brand new career. A lot of risk, but of course, a lot of reward. And then the biggest risk of my life, to be honest with you, was when I was 40 years old, I started London Real. I quit my job in finance. I walked away from a massive paycheck and I said, guess what? I'm going to be a YouTuber. When nobody was on YouTube back in 2011. It was a massive risk, but it turned out to give me a massive amount of reward. And so I would just say to everybody here thinking about these concepts, if you don't put risk into your life, there will be no reward. And it's easy now to look at the Bitcoin billionaires. And by the way, everybody on my show is a billionaire these days, pretty much in this DeFi space. On Friday, I think my guest was worth over 10 billion. And so we look at these people, and it's because they took risks. They bought Bitcoin back in 2011. They invested in crypto back in 2013. They quit their jobs and started businesses in the DeFi space back in 2017 and 18 in the bear markets. These people took risk, and that's why they're being rewarded. And we shouldn't forget that when we go into these markets, and we should find a way to intelligently take risk. And so that's what today's episode is all about. And I want to really drop into some of the big concepts of today. And I want to talk about something that I'm calling the blue chips of crypto. And it's how does Bitcoin today compare to Microsoft in 1998? And I want to put a slide up with a quote from Dan Morehead. And Dan Morehead runs Pantera Capital. And I want to just read out what Dan said. And he said, look, I think we're still in the early innings of a multi-decade transformation that's going to have a huge impact on literally billions of people. A portfolio should be more than one thing. A portfolio should be more than one thing. It's so important when he says that. Bitcoin has been amazing. However, I think the majority of future gains will be from tokens outside of Bitcoin. And I want you all just to think about what Dan said. Dan started his fund in 2013, Bitcoin only. Dan's had a 67,000% return on his Bitcoin fund. This guy could easily hitch his cart to Bitcoin and ride it out in the future. But he's saying, no, I don't think that's the right thing to do. And I agree with Dan. And Dan says, let's break it down and look a little bit deeper. And I want to go into some of Dan's IP because I think it's really important. And I'm going to put a graph up here on the screen that shows you the big tech relative market share of the current top 5 companies. And you can see I've got Facebook, Google, Amazon, Apple, and Microsoft. And you can see this relative market share start from 1998 and go all the way up to this year in 2021. Now let me show you what you need to be watching here, all right? If you go back to 1998, you see the entire tech market share dominated by Microsoft. 95, 97% market share. It was all in this one main company. But as you move forward, you see Apple, Amazon, Google, Facebook start to take chunks of the market because they're creating real value from a technology point of view. And if I fast forward to the next slide, we can actually look at the numbers. And if you look at the numbers, you can see Microsoft back in April 98 had a market cap of about $218 billion. That's the total worth of that company. Now, fast forward to this year, and that goes to 2.2 trillion. A great investment, don't get me wrong. You would have got 10x on your money. Thank you very much, Microsoft. But let's look a little bit deeper. If you looked at the outside tech market cap back in April of 98, you had 6 billion. That went up to 7.2 trillion by this year, giving you a rate of return of 1,200 times on your money, as opposed to 10x on your money. And you can come back in here and see me at this point. You can see those massive changes. Yes, Microsoft was a great investment. You got 10x returns. But is that the best way to manage your portfolio when you could have had 1,200x returns? And this is a great concept that's so important because it's being made by a guy like Dan Morehead, who's been there and done that. He could stay with Bitcoin and probably still get ridiculous returns. But Dan knows that he's got to diversify into other coins if he wants to get those big returns, much like you need to get out of Microsoft, or you needed to back in 98 if you wanted to have those big returns. Now that that's in your brain, let me show you the blockchain relative market share. And if you look at this graph that I'm putting on here on screen, you see the relative market share of Bitcoin, Ethereum, and other blockchains. Again, let's go back to 2013. Bitcoin with 96% dominance. Why? Well, Ethereum didn't exist back in 2013. Hadn't even done its ICO, wasn't even having a white paper out there. Okay, so of course Bitcoin would dominate. But look, as we go more and more forward, even up to today, you see Bitcoin dominance is down in the low 40s. And now you see Ethereum having a huge chunk of the market cap and other coins as well. And again, if we go back to the numbers and I show you the table, look at Bitcoin versus other blockchains when it comes to a market cap. Even look at this year. Bitcoin back in February of this year was worth about $1 trillion. Now it's worth the same, about $1 trillion. Not much of a change. Look at earlier this year, outside of Bitcoin, you had a 670 billion market cap. That alone has doubled up until today. So you can already see the gains that are starting to happen outside of the Bitcoin space. And so just to kind of summarize the key points that Dan's making here is that going forward, we need to look outside of those traditional investments. And again, I respect the Bitcoin maximalists out there. Well, I respect the people they are. I don't respect your philosophy. And so I had Max Kaiser back here in 2013. And Max, I'm still waiting for you to come on the show. All right, so I'm looking for you, Max Kaiser. But Max was here and we talked about Bitcoin and he had me on his show, The Kaiser Report on television. And I had him over for Thanksgiving and I love Max. But Max is only interested in Bitcoin and I respect Bitcoin. It's an incredible asset play, an incredible piece of technology. But I believe that moving forward, you have to have your portfolio diversified into other coins. And I want to talk about that diversification today. If you don't believe me, consider the Microsoft analogy. If you would stay with Microsoft, you would have had 10x returns, which is what most of my guests are predicting for Bitcoin over the next 5 to 7 years. Great. But what if you're looking for 1,000x returns? What if you're looking for those Google and Facebook and Amazon and Apple type returns from 1998 or 2003? If you want those, you're going to have to look outside the Bitcoin ecosystem, which means you're going to have to look into altcoins and what I call next 100x coins.